Gear up as Cash Miller and the team of accomplished guests steer you on an enlightening voyage filled with valuable tips, fresh insights, and effective strategies. Welcome to Marketing Masters, the Agency Power Show.
Hello, everyone. This is the host of Marketing Masters, Cash Miller. I'm the CEO of Titan Digital. Today, I'm talking blog writing. I've got Alison Ver Halen. I knew I would mess up that last name. Yeah, Ver Halen, AV Writing Services. She's a blogging expert, writes for website content, and really knows not just blogs but websites in general, the things that you need to be putting out there on your site, how to get attraction, the SEO best practices that you're going to want. How do you actually do this on a consistent basis and such? Alison, it is great to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
It's so great being here. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, like you said, I write blog posts. I do also write other website content, landing pages, sales pages, bios, all that good stuff. But blogging is my bread and butter. That's how I got started in this. A little background about me. I did major in English and psychology. So I got the perfect degree for what I'm doing without realizing that this was even an option. I thought I wanted to work in publishing, but I graduated in 2009, right when the job market crashed. So there were no jobs to be had in publishing or really anywhere else. So I answered phones for a few years to try to make ends meet, ended up between jobs at one point. My roommate at the time, her dad, who was an attorney, was awesome and offered to give me stuff to do around his office until I got back on my feet. And one of the things he needed was someone to write blog posts for his law firm. So he knew I had a strong writing background, so he offered me the gig. And I was like, what? I can get paid to write? Seriously? Yeah, sign me up. So I jumped at that chance, had never written a blog post before, much less a blog post about employment law. So I started by writing the blog posts he already had. He had been writing them himself, which lawyers should never write their own marketing content. I struggled to figure out what he was trying to say. The first couple paragraphs started out pretty strong, but then in the third paragraph, it jumped to something completely different. And I was like, how did you get from there to there? I did sit there and figure it out, and I did eventually figure out what he was trying to do, but only because I was getting paid to do so. If I had been a prospect, I would have said, okay, thanks, I'm going to find what I need somewhere else because this is not helping me. So I went back to him and said, yes, I can absolutely write blog posts for you because I know I can do better than this. I did not say that last part out loud. I just thought it really hard. So yeah, I took over writing blog posts for him, and I would write about 2 to 4 blog posts per month. And after 6 months, he came back and told me I had brought in $75,000 worth of business to his law firm through the content that I was writing for his blog posts. So that was my first indication that, oh, hey, there's real money to be made here. This is pretty cool. So that is how I got my start, and the rest is history.
Well, I think you kind of pointed out something really interesting that people forget. As when you're writing content and such, you're not a lawyer, right? So you have to, the challenge that you face is understanding, what kind of content they need. Like a lawyer is not necessarily great at writing, marketing content and blog content and such, but so they know the law. You are, the writer that can actually get it done in the correct way, but you have to learn, those things that you're going to write about. And law content is always, typically very specifically targeted, towards certain types of law and such, because people will look up, things about child custody or something else, and blog content actually can bring in quite a few customers, for them or clients because of the fact that they're looking up something specific. And if that piece is, ranked well, they have the chance that, that they're going to visit that site and they say, well, this person knows, what they're talking about. Maybe I should contact them, because not everybody, especially when, like lawyers, they'll specialize in certain things, certain types of law, and there's others they don't want to work with. So I think people, they don't realize how much on the, business owners, how much you have to take the time to understand their business so that you can write about it well. And that can be quite a challenge. So I'm sure you work with other types of clients besides lawyers, but I would think every time you have to do that research. Walk us through like just a little bit when you're learning about a new type of client, what's your process a little bit?
It varies from client to client. So for that particular client, he would actually send me news articles, or I would look for news articles about cases that are similar to the kinds of cases that he covers. And I would just repurpose the article into a blog post. So it was more like, here's what you need to know. Here's how the law applies. If you need help with this, or if you need help preventing this, reach out to us so we can help you with that. I still do a fair amount of research online to learn about my clients' industries and what they're doing. I do also, depending on the topic, I might just reach out to them and maybe interview them. Some of my clients do have an idea of what they want their topics to be on their blog post. Maybe they have some bullet points they want me to fill in, and that's great. That makes my job super easy. And other times, it's just interviewing my clients to get an idea of who they are, what they're all about, who their target audience is. So not only do I know the specifics of the topic that I'm covering, but I also know who the content is aimed at, so that we can kind of get inside their head and create content specifically for them.
Okay, so let's, that kind of goes into like a little bit of the structuring of blogs and stuff, so I want to start with like, what are the elements of a successful blog? How are, if you say, I'm going to do blogging and, we're going to try to make this so that it is actually, potentially a revenue producer to some degree for us, exposure, whatnot. What are the things you've got to do or should be doing as best practices with your blog?
First and foremost, consistency. Pick a schedule and stick to it. You don't have to blog every day or even every week, but at the very least once a month, ideally twice a month. Pick a schedule and stick to it. Be religious about it. Treat it just like any other client project or something with a hard deadline. Because if you don't, we all know it'll never get done. We all know it's the last thing on most of our to-do lists. So make sure that you make the time and you commit to doing that. Or again, hire someone like me to do it for you if that's just too much. Other elements of a successful blog, again, know your target audience and know the questions that they're asking. I use keywords, but if you don't pay for a keyword research tool, a great place to start is, what do people tend to ask you 90% of the time, whether it's in client calls, prospecting calls, networking events, summer barbecues where you're hanging out with people and they ask what you do and you tell them and they go, oh, I want to know about such and such, right? What are those questions that you hear over and over and over again? Because if they're asking those questions in person, there's a good chance they're asking them over at our good friend Google. So that can be a great way to get in front of people. Length is a question that I get all the time. How long should my blog post be? There is no one answer for that. I do want to, at least 500 words is the one hard rule I would give for how long it should be. That's about one page in a Microsoft Word document typed up single spaced. That's the bare minimum. Ideally, it should be longer. But again, if you find that you've covered everything there is to cover in a given topic in 600, 700 words, great. Don't feel like you have to keep writing to reach some arbitrary word count. Just create those long, in-depth, ultimate guide style blog posts because Google loves those. And then again, when people find your blog post, if they have a specific question related to the topic, they're more likely to find the answer to that in your blog post because you have covered everything there is to cover in there.
Okay, so you mentioned the word count and stuff because like Google does have suggestions anyway, because if you can get to longer counts, because they want to see that. I know Google's, of course, ultimate drive is always going to be, to provide the most relevant, best content that it can and everything, and so as part of the, I guess, a chance to show up, a little bit better, longer content, typically can help you in that regard as long as it's informative. You don't want to just fluff it up, stretch it out as much as you possibly can. That's going to be a problem. How do you go about, okay, so if you're picking topics, to make sure that they're relevant. Because sometimes, companies can put content out that is like, it can grab traction, but, it's not going to necessarily be any kind of a revenue driver. A lawyer is going to talk about stuff specific to them, but you can end up with content that is like kind of in the realm, but it'll grab traffic, because you might be able to rank for it well and stuff. So how do you go about determining, what kind of content you really should be? I mean, you talk to them, you have an idea, okay, this is the things, but let's talk about the actual like keyword research. Let's get into the SEO piece a little bit, of how do you go about ranking that? If you're going to optimize a blog post, what are your steps going to be?
Okay, that's at least two different questions. So let me start with the first part about making sure it generates revenue. Is sometimes one blog post won't generate revenue with one reader or one read through, right? Sometimes some people get to your blog and they'll read a blog post and they want to know more, or they want to sign up for your newsletter, or maybe they're interested, but they're not ready to buy yet. I run into this a lot because I tend to have a pretty long buyer journey. A lot of my clients are they're technically in the B2C space, but they tend to be professional service providers. Like I said, the lawyers and the financial people. So they tend to act more like a B2B in that they have that longer buyer journey. So with the call to act, so know what that buyer journey looks like so that you know where they are in the buyer journey when they're encountering each piece of content. Blog posts can be great ways to capture people early in the buyer journey when they're looking, what is this law, or how to do such and such, or what is this? Why do I need to know about it? That's when they're just kind of exploring this area. They're probably not going to be ready to buy yet, but that's a great way to capture them on your blog and either lead them to other content on your blog. You can invite them to subscribe to your newsletter, sign up for your webinar, download XYZ, whatever that lead magnet is, so that you can capture them in the funnel and then keep leading them through that buyer journey all the way to the point where they're ready to buy. So, the other part of that is you can have blog posts that are like, here's my new thing and here's what you need to know about it, and here's where you can go to buy it. The vast majority of your blog posts should be value driven. You should be educating your prospects on a certain aspect of your business, your product, your service. Again, I'm service-based. Most of my clients are service-based. So we tend to focus on here's what you need to know to help yourself before reaching out to a professional. The vast majority of your blog posts should be focused on that educational content. And then every once in a while, you can sprinkle in something that's purely promotional, especially if you are, publishing your new book or launching a new product or service or a webinar or whatever it might be that warrants that kind of promotion. So that's the answer to that question, or a couple different answers to that question. And then you were asking about keywords. So I always look for keywords that have a decent search volume, meaning at least more than 100, hopefully average searches per month, which is the other thing to know about keyword tools is they tend to show you the average number of searches per month. Okay. So you might, depending on the keyword, you might also want to look at the trends. It will show you the trends over time. If it's trending upward and more people are looking for it now than they were before, that's an excellent time to use that keyword. If it's on the downward trend, then maybe that keyword is dying and it's time to look for something else. Other keywords are seasonal, gift guides and holiday stuff and 4th of July and summer tips. And those are the things that we tend to see people searching at certain times of the year and then not the rest of the year. And then they search it again the next year. So keep that in mind as well. The other thing I look at is the SEO difficulty score, sometimes called the competition score. That gives you an idea of how much content is already out there online that contains that keyword. One being there's no content out there. You can absolutely rank for that keyword without even trying. 100 being there's a ton of content out there using this keyword. You have no chance of ranking for it. Don't even bother. So obviously you want to aim for something less than 50. I actually tend to aim closer to the 25 mark just because that gives you a really easy way to rank for that keyword. So you do often have to kind of balance between search volume and that competition score. Sometimes you got to go for something with a little lower search volume to get the lower competition score and vice versa. So that is something that I look at. And then as far as where they are in the buyer journey, you can find that out by looking keywords as well. What other pieces of content already have that keyword? If you put it into Google and they get a carousel that pops up, then that it tends to show that people are later in the buyer stages when they are when they are using that keyword. Those later in the buyer stages keywords I tend to save for the sales pages, because that's where you want to drive that content. Again, the how-tos, the informational searches, always include those in your blog posts, because that's, a great way to capture people early on in the buyer journey. I know that was a long answer. I hope I answered all of your question there. I hope I didn't miss anything.
Well, another thing too, from the keyword standpoint, that we've always liked to do is do an actual search for the keyword too, see what comes up in Google. And you look at two things. You look at the number of competing pages, knowing that, it could show 100 million. I always like to, obviously you want the number to be a lot lower, because and not all of them are relevant. The majority are not, but it's going to mean that there is a segment, of those first, 5 or 10 pages or something of results that are going to be, competing with you. And then the other thing I like to do is also just look at the result itself. Who is ranking? What are those sites? Are those sites strong and powerful? Because depending on what your site is, it doesn't matter if there's only so many competing pages. If those pages are really strong because of the sites they're on, it's going to be hard to beat them out because of that. So you want to keep those things in mind as well when you're seeing about what content you want to go after, because you don't want to take on the Bahamas of the world. You want to find the ones that, if it's other, like I always like to use like a landscaper as an example. If you're just competing with other landscapers, that's fine, but if you find some blog that's on homedepot.com or something, that's going to be, and it's okay if there's one or two, but if you see the whole first, page, the 10 results or whatever, now it keeps scrolling on. But if you see that, that's going to be an issue, so you're trying to find places that are not saturated, whatnot. Do you see, I mentioned landscapers. Do you see the value? So, you talked about how-to pages and such. A lot of times at certain industries, like, let's say if you have a landscaper and they're giving you gardening tips or something like that, well, they're teaching you technically how to do something. Do you see value in those things? Because, the idea for the landscaper is to sell it as a service. So how do you approach that? What's the value if they're telling you technically how to do this or that?
Yeah, it depends on the client. So my approach to that for my own business is, because what I'm selling is the service. If people just want to do it themselves, they're not my ideal client. I would rather give them all of the information and tell them everything that I do and have them go, whoa, this is a lot. I don't have time for this. I'm just going to hire Alison to do it for me. I would say the same is probably true of the landscaper. If someone is determined to do it themselves, they're going to do it themselves. If it's too much time and they don't want to invest that time in doing their own landscaping and gardening, they're going to look for someone else to do it for them. I do also work for coaches, business coaches, where what they're selling is their knowledge. So they do have a cutoff point of, they'll give you a taste. They'll give you just enough to, again, understand the value of what they're providing and a taste of who they are, what it might be like to work with them, and hopefully enough that you can start to get results by yourself, but enough to know that you can get even more by working with them.
Yeah, that's good right there. Yeah, give them a taste. Give them just enough to understand that what you're going to be doing can be really difficult, and you may want to hire, the expert whose blog you're reading, to do it for you instead. So that's where your real value in blogs can be is, and especially with those services that you can technically, you could do it yourself, right? And so if you're still trying to sell what is a fairly common service, or people can, I say they can attempt to do it themselves and probably can do it, it's almost convincing them it's more work, than you want to maybe tackle, and it would be better to hire somebody to come out and do it for you.
Yeah.
So how do you go about, promoting, the blog posts and stuff, so you've got SEO, and if you hit on a good keyword and stuff, there's the chance that it's going to rank. If the site is fairly strong to begin with, it's going to give it a little more of a boost, but that's even though it's still a brand new page. But how do you go, I say, because it can be a little bit of a crapshoot, on whether something is going to hit or not. So what are other ways you could do it, be using to promote a blog?
Newsletter is a great way to promote it. If people signed up for your newsletter, that's a way of saying they want more updates from you. So I always put a link to a little teaser about my latest blog posts at the top of my newsletter, and then a link over to that so people can read the full article if they're interested. That has been a great way for me to educate my audience and keep them engaged. So again, by the time they're ready to hire me because they've gotten all that great information, and they understand the value of what I do. They're already well educated in my industry because they've read all that great content. So newsletter and social media, and actually social media and SEO can kind of help each other. If you really know what you're doing on social media and you use that to promote your website, that can actually boost your SEO. Because again, Google is also keeping track of your mentions and what's going on social media, because Google knows all and it's keeping track of all these things. So especially if you're getting traffic from those websites, Google is going to take note of that. So that can be a high quality LinkedIn. Link building is also a great way to get organic traffic to your website as well as boost your SEO. So link building is when you ask other websites to link high quality websites, preferably. If it's a low quality website linking to your website, that can actually hurt your SEO. But if it's a high quality relevant website that is providing a link from their website to your website, that is an external backlink. Google loves those. That is a way of, it's the difference between you saying, hey, I'm an expert, I really know what I'm talking about, versus someone else saying, no, seriously, this person really is an expert and they know what they're talking about. It gets you that social proof and that buy-in. So Google loves that. And again, real people love that. So that will boost your SEO. It's also a great way to, again, just organically drive traffic back there, because hopefully people are seeing that link on that other website and clicking through it to your website.
Okay, great. So let's also get into, consistency and stuff. A lot of people take on doing blogs, but then, I always, one of the things I always advise my clients, if you're going to do blogging and stuff, take the dates off, the blogs, because what ends up happening is they stop at some point, if they're doing it themselves. Now, if we're doing it for them and stuff, no problem. Leave the dates on, because we're going to be on a schedule, and you're paying us to do this. So we're not going to, stop until until you tell us to stop, but when, people do it on their own, often there is a point, and then you go to a site, and my personal opinion is that, if you're going to have the blog on the site, either keep doing it. I say you could take the dates off if you want, because then they don't know when your last post is, because it could have been 3 years ago, because otherwise, or remove the blog entirely, because of the fact that I think, when it's dated like that, it gives the negative impression. If it's like, why have it, if you're not going to bother to keep it up. So it's kind of like choose one. If you're going to do it, no problem. But if things change, so how do business owners and stuff maintain consistency? What kind of tips would you have so that if you're going to do this, you can, make sure you actually keep doing it to get the value out of it?
Yeah. Well, a couple points about the date. Including the date in the publication can actually boost your SEO. But even if you don't publish the date, even if it's not visible, Google still has its ways of figuring out when stuff was published. And Google does prioritize newer content over older content, because it assumes that it's more relevant. So even without the date, that can hurt your SEO if you're not publishing on a regular basis. And again, Google keeps track of when you're publishing and how fresh content is. So that is always a reason to keep up with your blog. Consistency is super important. And again, with the topic, assuming it's an evergreen topic, maybe people come into your website, can't tell it was published, 3 years ago, like you said, but maybe it's a super timely topic where you're talking about a news article that just broke at the time, or For me, it might be, Google's latest update that happened back in, May of 2022. If I'm writing about that and that's the last blog post on my blog, then people are going to say, well, clearly she hasn't written a new blog post in a while. So that's my take on that. As far as how to remain consistent, come up with a calendar and stick to it religiously, treat it like any other deadline that has that hard stop. It has to be published at this time, on this date, every single, week, month, every other week, whatever it ends up being. Have that schedule and stick to it. Don't post on like Thursday and then Friday and then be like, those are my 2 blog posts for the month. That's not going to help you at all. If you do 2 a month, make, one on the 1st and one on the 15th as an example. It doesn't have to be that. Just make sure it's spaced out so that it makes sense. Having time set aside to blog. I have time set aside every week to write my own blog posts. So absolutely make sure that is a priority so that it is on your calendar and you don't forget about it. And again, it has to have the same amount of importance in your calendar as every client meeting and bit of client work and team meetings and everything else that you're doing for your business. That has to get done. Having a calendar where you can sit down once a month, once a quarter and go, okay, what am I going to blog about over this period of time? And if you already have the title, maybe a quick outline for each blog post that you're going to write over the next, like I said, month, quarter, whatever it ends up being, then when it's time to sit down and write it, it makes it go that much faster because you already know what you're talking about and you already know what you're going to say. You just have to fill in the blanks. So those are some great ways to help you stay consistent.
Well, one of the, also when it comes to writing, because it can always be a challenge to find the time to sit down and stuff. And so you can go ahead and write your posts, and do them all together. Even if you're going to do 2 a month or whatever, just don't publish them together. Okay. Right. Like you mentioned, publish one. And most blogging systems, WordPress, things like that, you can go ahead and put it in there and you can set it so on a date that it's going to publish. Just like social media, you can schedule, pre-schedule stuff and have it come out at, whenever you tell it to, because you're right, you don't want the back-to-back. You want to be able to space it, have consistency and stuff, but it doesn't mean you don't have, you can't do the work all at the same time. What kind of time investment on an individual post can people expect if they're going to do it right? They're not just trying to rush through it, get it done, but they've done their homework, the keyword research and stuff. They've taken the time to make sure it's optimized. What's the time investment look like on a per blog post?
Yeah, I think I saw somewhere that on average people spend 4 hours on a blog post. Obviously, your mileage may vary depending on how long the blog post is, how fast of a writer you are. Doing things like coming up with that outline ahead of time can speed up the process. So be prepared to spend a good chunk of time. I think it tends to take me about an hour and a half to 2 hours per blog post. Again, I'm a pretty fast writer, so that's true of me. That might be true of everyone.
Yeah, well, that's also the difference between somebody that does it for a living, and somebody that is just doing it as one aspect of their business, but it's not something they're necessarily trained to do. So if you're going to tackle it, then expect to spend a little more time. Okay, so I want to get your take with, because I've been asking this of like multiple people with all the AI stuff that's come out. Chat, just what's your opinion? What's your take, especially as it applies to blog posts? Because people are doing it already. They're already using it to write up posts and stuff. So what's your take? Because you're a professional writer, versus, an AI doing it for you.
Yeah, I never recommend having an AI completely do it for you. It's important to remember that it's not actually generating new text. It's taking content that already exists out in the world and just kind of regurgitating it for you. So what ends up happening is you have content that sounds like all of the other content out there. And Google does not like that. Google prioritizes original content over copy content. And it's not going to do anything to help your branding. You're not standing out from the crowd. People have no reason to come to you over someone else because you're saying the same thing they're saying. And if the content you publish on your website is too similar to content that's on other websites, that can potentially get you into some copyright issues. So you also want to take a look at that. I am all for using ChatGPT as a way to get over, if you have writer's block, just kind of getting over the hump and having it jot down some ideas for you. And then you can take that and run with it. All for that. If you do have it write a blog post for you, at least edit it, at least make sure that you change it up enough that it's recognizably in your brand voice and targeted to your audience. So you're not just copying and pasting from ChatGPT to your website. I have seen some people doing some really interesting things with ChatGPT in terms of data analysis, which I think is pretty cool. You can get a lot of insights into your target audience, into your website traffic, into all these different things online by inputting that into ChatGPT and having it spit out information related to that for you. I think that is a great use of AI. And that's something that I don't see enough people talking about. I see a lot of people being like, oh, I can have AI do this for me. It's like, well, you can.
Yeah.
You
Actually,
can.
I think, like it can write you the post, certainly, but you make some valid points about the issues you're going to run into. But the data analysis is an interesting thing, because we use chat and stuff around here for certain things, but we encourage that it is an assistant. It is not replacement, for things. So it can help give you ideas, so yes, here, give me topics that I might be able to write about. It can, but the data analysis is something, especially with highly technical, because we've run into things in the past where the company that we might be trying to do blogging for is extremely technical in nature, and so it can be a bit harder to understand. And so chat can help you kind of analyze and explain, okay, this is what, is involved with this type of business. This is what they're trying to do. And then it's like, okay, now I've got something to work with, because sometimes it can be hard to either maybe even get the client to explain it, exactly what they do. And so you've got to do a little bit more research into the industry. And sometimes the things you might find online as far as the research don't quite fit either, so being that it can analyze this stuff, I think it's, that's an interesting use of it, versus, like I say, it's not doing the job for you, but it is going to help make it easier for you to do it and put together a productive piece. So if you're a business owner and you're also looking at new angles, because a lot of times business owners, I say, especially when it comes to writing about their own thing, that can be difficult. And just like you get so, I guess, intertwined that you don't know how to take a look at what people would want to hear about. You're just, because you live it, so, it's a little bit different. But I'm just interested because it's like with chat and other AI services, that have been popping up left and right now, they're all doing certain things, but but it is not the end all be all of any of it.
Right.
So it's great. So what, we're nearing the end here. What takeaways, if you're a business owner that wants to get started and says, okay, I'm going to do this, I think it can benefit my business. What do they need to be thinking about before they start? And then once they get going?
Yeah. Consistency. I know we mentioned at least twice already, but it really cannot be stressed enough. So that is first and foremost, and keeping your target audience top of mind in every step of the process of creating that content, from what topics are you covering to the language that you're using in your content to where and when you're distributing it. Keep in mind that this is of service to your target audience so that you can position yourself as an expert in your industry. So what do they want to hear? Where are they looking for this information? What stories will resonate with them? I always like to include a story element in my blog posts and make it a story that puts my customer first, front and center. So I know you mentioned that we're all guilty of this. We all get so into the weeds in our own business that sometimes we forget that there are other perspectives out there, and people might not, the people reading our content might not have our understanding of our industry that we have. So taking that step back and going, oh, that's right, they might not know this term, or they might use this term instead of this term. Super important. So, yeah.
Yeah, I always find it important, like if you, when it comes to writing and stuff, like sometimes you need to simplify it. Like, when you're dug into your own business, there are certain things and certain ways of speaking and language and stuff that you understand. and you pretty much talk that way, and you don't realize it because you've been doing it so long. So you have to look at it from the, bring it more down to the layman's, terms, and understand that they don't have a clue if you go too technical and things on them. You have to be, it's not necessarily you're dumbing it down, you're simplifying the language so that they can understand it, and then, and know what you're actually talking about. So always, consider that when you're writing, if you, and a good thing to do is take some of that writing, ask some people, when you're first getting started, does this make sense to you? Yeah. And so that you can kind of, because writing is a matter, you do want a certain voice to it, a tone to it that you develop, and that speaks for your business essentially. So you want to make sure. So when you do your first couple of pieces, get some feedback before you do a bunch more. That way you can get that tone down.
Absolutely.
So this has been great. Alison, how would people get a hold of you, if they needed your services?
Yeah, so my website is AV, as in my initials, Alison Ver Halen. So that is avwritingservices.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube.
That's great. So we've been talking about blog writing and how you can take advantage of it for your business. I'm your host, Cash Miller, Marketing Masters. I'm the CEO of Titan Digital. Alison, it's been wonderful to have you today. I hope everybody gets something out of this episode.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.